Remedy Entertainment is one of those companies that tends to fly under many people's radars when it comes to talking about notable video game developers. People will mention gaming greats like Rockstar, Naughty Dog, Yondari Dev, and Valve, but Remedy Entertainment rarely ever gets a look in, despite their impressive catalogue of games. Remedy came from very humble beginnings, with its founding members being made up of programmers who were part of the demo scene, with many of them coming from Future Crew and other demo developers, who were inspired to create video games by Finland's first commercially recognised developers, Bloodhouse and Housemarque, and so remade themselves into Remedy in 1995, working on small projects here and there, before really hitting the mainstream with Max Payne in 2001. The most intriguing aspect of a game developed by Remedy Entertainment is usually its narrative. Their games have a very cinematic feel to them, due to their engaging stories and the interesting ways they tell these stories. This is mostly thanks to their creative director Sam Lake, who has helped bring many of their stories to life. Their games tend to focus on a strong central character, who has to take matters into their own hands after something in their life goes horribly wrong. The most notable characters Remedy Entertainment have created are Max Payne and Alan Wake. Of course, the reason I'm even making a video like this is because recently the sequel to Alan Wake was released, and I have a lot to say about that game. From the trailers alone, I could tell that Alan Wake 2 would be a game I'd enjoy. A creepy psychological survival horror. Fuck hell, where do I sign? The game had all the qualities to be something special, but one thing that did put me off was the fact that I'd never played the previous Alan Wake, or its spin-off, Alan Wake's American Nightmare. I remember briefly seeing Alan Wake in a gaming magazine when I was a wee lad, but my tiny brain couldn't comprehend what it was about, and I was too busy getting traumatised by other games to even consider playing a scary game. Before I actually get into Alan Wake 2, I need to talk about the games that came before it. The first Alan Wake was released in 2010, and takes place in 2010. It tells the story of Alan, obviously, and his wife Alice, on their holiday break in Bright Falls, a small town surrounded by a creepy-ass forest. Alan is a best-selling writer, who has come along with Alice to help break his 2-year writer's block, but the trip goes from being a nice quiet getaway to a living nightmare, as Alan and Alice become involved in strange paranormal happenings, with Alice even getting kidnapped, and many of the townsfolk becoming possessed by living shadows, turning them into the Taken. This leads to Alan taking up arms against this army of darkness, with guns and a torch. Like I said before, Remedy's style of storytelling is almost cinematic in the way that they convey plot threads and characters, and Alan Wake tells its story like a TV series. Each chapter is split into episodes, and each episode contains twists and cliffhangers that lead into the next episode. It's an interesting concept for a game, and it keeps you interested in the plot for a while. As much as I wanted to like the story for Alan Wake, the constant twists and turns made the plot feel like it was dragging on, and made the whole thing a little hard to follow. It felt like Remedy started with the twists here and there, and then felt like every episode had to involve some sort of headfuckery.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
Which I guess is appropriate considering Alan's head is a mess, but it doesn't make for a really great story. Some of the voice acting in the game also really seems like you're listening to a brick rub against a cheese grater.
Oh God, I am your biggest fan. I know people say that all the time, but
The first Alan Wake is not a fully fledged horror game. It instead borrows elements from the genre, like a creepy setting and lots of jump scares. It goes for a psychological horror style, while being more like an action-adventure game. Despite borrowing these elements, the game really isn't scary. Sure, the jump scares get you, but flash anything in front of someone suddenly and they'll get spooked. Cauldron Lake and the surrounding areas of Bright Falls could have been truly creepy and atmospheric, like we'd see years later in the sequel, but in the original, everything feels lifeless. We already knew it was possible at that time to make an open space truly feel oppressive and creepy, but Remedy really didn't capitalise on this. Alan Wake heavily relies on its gameplay, and that element of the game isn't much better. Like I said, it's more action than full-blown survival horror, although there are some similar elements. Since enemies are people possessed by darkness, you must first break this layer to get to the human underneath, and you do that with your trusty torch. Aiming your torch at enemies breaks the dark seal, and allows you to move in for the kill. Sounds simple enough, but your torch goes through batteries quicker than a vibrator, so keeping a healthy stock handy is a must. Other useful tools include flares, flashbangs, and flare guns that can do devastating damage to these shadow people. That sounded a bit racist. Light is your ally throughout the game. Only in the light are you truly safe from Taken townsfolk, vehicles, and who can forget the ever-terrifying barrel. This element kind of took me out of the game. Possessed townsfolk can be intimidating, but when you've got flying wheels and scrap metal coming at you, it just feels a bit goofy. But that's not to say inanimate objects can't be scary. You know, I've watched Monster House, and that shit was terrifying. The birds have also been inspired by a certain Hitchcock film, as they will stop at nothing to kill you unless you blow them away with the light source. Alan can't fight in hand-to-hand combat, so when enemies are close, the only thing you can do is dodge their attacks. Unfortunately, the gameplay is severely underwhelming. Enemies go down easily, even on the hard difficulties, and each level basically consists of running to a location, killing enemies, running to the next location, turning on a power source, killing a bunch of enemies, then Alan screaming Alice for the 30th time.
Alice! 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 Alice!
While Alan Wake has its moments, there's nothing outwardly memorable about the game, save for Alan himself, who is a decent protagonist and is constantly narrating over the game because we are playing through a story he wrote, while being possessed by the dark presence in Cauldron Lake. All of this happened because an old hag from the past wanted revenge on a writer called Thomas Zane, who she loved, and took it out on Alan because he looks a bit like him, and only the clicker can stop the dark presence for good. No, not that one, this one. Then while trying to save Alice, Alan gets sent to the dark place, where fiction becomes reality, and he becomes trapped there. Then he discovers there's an evil version of him called Mr. Scrooge, who is trying to break out of the dark place, to mould reality into his own image. There are some good elements to the story, but they aren't executed too well. I know the game has a lot of fans, but I don't know, I just couldn't get into it. In fact, I thought the spin-off Alan Wake's American Nightmare was handled a lot better. It takes place inside of an episode of Night Springs, a made-up show in the Alan Wake universe. You play as Alan, trapped in a time loop, as he's forced to play out events over and over again by Mr. Scrooge, and has to figure out a way to break the cycle and make it back to Alice. This game isn't very long, it takes about 3 hours to complete, and yet for me it's so much better than the first game. Tonally, the game is a lot better, as it doesn't take itself as seriously as the first one, and Mr. Scrooge is an entertaining character, as he's just Alan, but more unhinged and psychotic. The game has a more humorous undertone, letting you know that it's not trying to be scary like the first one, which gives it a more unique and memorable personality. The gameplay feels so much slicker too. Combat isn't so rigid and dull, as it's easier to aim and move around, making fights a lot more engaging, and finding manuscript pages actually has a purpose now, as you can unlock new weapons with the more you find. Although it does get a bit repetitive because you play through the same locations again and again, it's short enough to not really get annoyed by it, and there's a great segment where you have to arrange some objects in front of an oil well to cause a satellite to fall out of the sky, all the while Clubfoot by Kasabian is playing in the background. In all, American Nightmare was a fun experience that definitely showed potential for the series going forward, so after finally playing through these games, it came time to play Alan Wake 2, and to my surprise, it was great. Like really great. I don't know if maybe my mediocre reaction to the first game dulled any kind of expectations for the second, but the long-awaited sequel completely changed my mind on the series. It improves on so much from the original two games, to the point where it doesn't feel or act anything like them, to a certain degree. There's still features and mechanics that carry over between the games, and yet it feels so fresh and adopts a whole new persona. Despite the game being called Alan Wake 2, Alan is a secondary protagonist in the game, as the brand new character Saga Anderson takes on the role as the main protagonist. Saga is called to Bright Falls because there's a cult murdering people and committing rituals in the forest surrounding Cauldron Lake, and she, along with her partner Casey, played by Sam Lake,
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman,
set about to find the people responsible for committing these crimes. After a strange encounter at the local sheriff's station transforms a corpse into a murderous creature of darkness, Saga realises there's more than just a psycho cult going around, which is made even clearer when Alan Wake appears on the banks of Cauldron Lake, 13 years after he went missing at the end of the first game, and so the two characters work together to put an end to Scratch's dark hold on reality, before Saga's life is permanently changed forever. Alan Wake 2 leans more into the survival horror tropes that the first game barely dipped its toes into. The visual style of this game really sells the bleak and unnatural feeling of Bright Falls 10 times more than the original ever did. In the well-lit town, you feel safe, everything is glowing, and normal everyday townsfolk just walk along happy as can be. Yeah, some of them are a bit creepy, but I'm not judgmental. But then you step out of town and explore the greyer parts of Bright Falls, and shit gets spooky really quick. The lighting, or lack thereof, in these locations is really disturbing. It doesn't feel out of place in a dark woods, but when you are entering places like a trailer park, a lighthouse, and a fairground, and the primary colour is grey, then you know there's something wrong with the place. It makes the real world part of the game feel so creepy, because you can barely distinguish what's a few feet in front of you, without shining your flashlight around to investigate. Was that a person I just saw, or a giant fucking wolf on speed? I said the real world part of the game, because the other part of the game is set in the Dark Place. This is where you play as Alan for the majority of the game, as he tries to navigate his way out of this never-ending nightmare that he's been stuck in for 13 years. The Dark Place is probably the most visually striking location of the game, feeling like it's been ripped out of a neo-noir detective film, with its dingy back alleys, high-rise buildings, and flashy neon signs that act as clues on where to go next. All the while, shadowy figures that chant your name roam the streets, and if you get too close to some of them, they even become violent, as they realise you aren't a shadow like them. I think what allows you to truly appreciate these locations, unlike the first game, is because Alan Wake 2 is a free roam experience. The original Alan Wake was a linear experience, as it constantly pushed the player forward to progress in a quick manner, constantly putting them in conflict and having them run from one end of the level to the other. You could explore levels, but the only point of this was to find collectibles like manuscript pages and fucking thermoses that had no effect on the gameplay. The only thing it did was show how much of a coffee addict Alan was. Alan Wake 2 lets you appreciate every creepy corner of this cursed town and see just how intimidating the Dark Place has been for Alan. The freedom of exploration allows you to do a lot more in the game besides killing enemies, as you can hunt for extra loot and complete secondary puzzles to gain access to better weapons, and find cute charms for your bracelet that grant you special perks. Puzzles were never a big part of the first Alan Wake, as the hardest thing you had to do was push the W key, but it makes sense that this game would embrace puzzles, given the fact that it's essentially a paranormal detective game, kind of like an unhinged Professor Layton game with more action. A brand new feature in Alan Wake 2 is the Mind Place. Saga is an FBI agent and has the ability to retreat into her mind to deduce cases on the fly. She manifests this place as a small room with several areas where she can perform different tasks, like compile evidence, upgrade her weapons, and find out information that is being withheld from her by people she has spoken to. It's confusing at first as to how she can do this, but as the game progresses, it becomes more clear. Collecting evidence is a key mechanic in the game as you carry out your investigation, interviewing people, and finding hidden clues around the town and the surrounding areas. Seeing as how Alan is stuck in the Dark Place, his line of inquiry is very different. Alan is seemingly trapped inside of a story he has written, or rather Scratch has written, and so to escape the constant looping, he has the ability to change certain scenes he is in, allowing him to see important events unfold and briefly talk to Saga from beyond the Dark Place. A big problem the first game suffered from was that there was no sense of progression. Given the game's episodic nature, the game would often take all of your items off of you, save for a few, at the beginning of every level, or even location. This was done as a way to not make you feel overpowered all the time, but it means you can't get much use out of the weapons you find. But the sequel gives a true sense of progression. As the game goes on, Saga and Alan gain new abilities and weapons, which encourage you to carry on and strive to continue improving your skill set, which makes the overall experience that much more engaging. Combat has nearly been perfected in the sequel too. Shots feel impactful, and ammo isn't just strung around everywhere. You actually have to think carefully about whether or not it's worth killing an enemy, or saving the ammo for later. Aiming your weapon no longer drains your battery life, which is great as it makes gunplay feel more receptive and less random and janky. Instead, you have a button for specifically boosting your flashlight to get rid of an enemy's shield. However, I found this method far less effective than the standard way back in the first Alan Wake. It seems like you burn through so many more batteries now because the light beam never works first time, no matter how accurately you hit that sweet spot. The original Alan Wake felt like a bog standard game. Nothing about it really stood out all that much, as the story, visuals, and gameplay were all fairly bare bones, and yet the sequel has so many moments that stick with you after playing. Several characters from the original, like Thor, Odin, Rose, Nightingale, and the crazy lamp lady, all reappear in this sequel, and leave such a bigger impact than they did in the original. While the first three do, the other two are just there for jump scares. Though it is a horror game and contains some very dark moments, there's equally those moments where the game leans into the comedy aspect American Nightmare took. This is present throughout Alan's part of the game, as you can tell the actors playing Alan, Matthew Peretta the voice, and Ilka Villa, Alan's real-life performer, had a lot more freedom to bring the character to life. Stylistically, the way the game conveys its story is so much better too, as it blends a mix of cutscenes and real-life footage of the actors in character, which gets you that much more invested in the story. It also symbolises how real the Dark Place truly is for Alan. There's also a segment in the game where you get to walk through a musical performed by the old gods of Asgard, along with Alan and backup dancers. It really is a spectacle that catches you off guard at first, but then you realise just how broken Alan's mind truly is. I'm sure many die-hard Alan Wake fans were concerned when it was revealed that the campaign would be split between Alan and newcomer Saga, but I think Saga is a big reason for why the story is as good as it is. She comes across as a very humble yet capable character, putting her friends and family's safety above her fears of the unknown. While she may not be as entertaining or memorable as Alan, because honestly Alan stole the show, The story itself is pretty confusing at first, kind of like how it was in the original. The player is left in the dark for most of the game, while each episode of Saga's and Alan's stories peels away a layer of the narrative to reveal another layer of fuckery.
I am your great uncle Odin, and this is your long lost Mother 5.
A lot of the mystery revolves around Saga and why she's here in the first place. Despite arriving only a few hours ago with her partner Casey, the townsfolk talk to her like they've known her for ages, even going as far as to say her daughter, Logan, who's very much alive, drowned a few years ago. Of course, Saga is genuinely confused by this news and believes that the townsfolk are messing with her, thinking that maybe the cult of the tree is responsible. This would be the simple explanation, but in the world of Alan Wake, a simple explanation just won't do. During those 13 years Alan was inside the dark place, Mr. Scrooge was cooking up a new novel that was leaking out of Cauldron Lake and into the real world, which is why Taken are terrorising Bright Falls once again. Alan, in a last-ditch effort to stop the dark presence, has to travel around the dark place, uncover secrets, and rewrite key events to correct the story and save the world. He couldn't do this task by himself, however, which is why he wrote Saga into the story to act as his hero, to repel the Taken from the real world and help him locate the clicker. Bringing Saga into this horror story means her family is now at risk, as Scrooge wrote the novel to include the death of Logan, which Saga is less than thrilled by. One of the biggest mysteries throughout most of the game is that whilst Alan was found on the bank of Cauldron Lake and aids in Saga's investigation, we can still play as Alan in the dark place. The obvious answer being that one of these Alans is Mr. Scrooge, which turns out to be correct. Well, kind of. The one that appeared on the riverbank is Scrooge and causes havoc in the sheriff's station. This pushes Saga to find the real Alan, which is when she decides to enlist the help of the old gods of Asgard, who are revealed to be her granddad and uncle, to perform live at Cauldron Lake, because only the power of an epic rock ritual can bring Alan home. But when they complete the ritual and nothing happens, Saga realises that it did work. Alan was freed from the dark place the previous morning, and then the penny drops. Mr. Scrooge and Alan are one in the same.
Dun dun dun!
Rather than just being an evil version of Alan, Scrooge is Alan with the dark presence living inside of him, and after expelling it, Saga is transported to the dark place, and Alan must rescue her by stealing a copy of Scrooge's new novel, Return, and change its ending. The dark presence has taken over Casey at this point, and he's started to change reality, brainwashing most of the townsfolk. All the while Alan is running from freaky townies, Saga is having a mental battle with herself. The dark place has begun to try and break her mentally, making her believe she was the one responsible for Logan dying, and getting her partner Casey hurt, essentially turning her own mind place against her. Luckily, through the power of friendship, Alan and Saga are able to reunite and put the dark presence down for good by shooting Alan in the head with a magical bullet. Alan Wake 2 is a massive improvement from the original two games, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have problems of its own. First of all, the game is buggy as fuck. Well, the late game was anyway. I didn't have any problems for most of the game, besides for a few frame and graphical issues, but you can look past these minor inconveniences. But what you can't look past is getting sucked into the endless void for going through a door too quickly. Not all of the glitches were bad though, as this glitch made deer masks float ominously in the air, which unironically made that part of the game even scarier. The game felt like it was copying a lot of the first game's bad traits, including twists for the sake of twists, like how the cult of the tree was actually a good cult, and having Alice kill herself after everything Alan did for her, jokes, she didn't really, and how Alan makes a noble sacrifice at the end, Psyche doesn't really. It felt like Remedy didn't have the guts to give the game a dark ending. Though the game has an open ending, and I'm almost certain there will be a DLC or a follow-up game, it would have been a nice change to have a dark ending for a horror game, like Silent Hill 2. Despite the weak ending, the game has so many redeeming qualities that give it such a unique personality, and who knows, maybe the positive reception of this game will give us that much awaited Max Payne 4.